Hey, thank you so much, and a very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Apulak Ghosh, and I'm so grateful that all of you could take out time today and be a part of today's webinar. This is a action-packed webinar. We have my keynote to begin with. We have a stellar panel that I'll be most fortunate to moderate, and we'll conclude by having our friends from Dell walk you through a presentation from their end, right? So without further ado, I'll probably take you through a presentation that I've created for all of you. It takes about 25 minutes just to set the context for today's conversation. You know, so at ThinkTeal, we hear a term very commonly these days. I'm sure as IT decision makers, you would have probably encountered the term digital transformation literally on a daily basis, right? But it's very important for all of us to understand, how do I bucketize digital transformation? Because at the end of it, digital transformation has to have a business imperative. It has to be mapped with a metrics through which one can measure the success of the transformation initiative that we're doing. So at ThinkTeal, we devise a three-pronged strategy. So how typically an organization breaks its digital transformation journey. So namely, the three pillars are A, business processes, B, business strategy, and finally, but very importantly, the stakeholders. Now, let me spend a minute on each one of these. So as you can see, when we talk about business processes and strategy, historically, most organizations have spent a lot of effort in, optimizing your, business strategy and processes for the benefit of your organization. But over the last 2 to 3 years, especially when the pandemic hit us, we saw a lot of importance being given to stakeholders also. Because, like it or not, we came to a situation where getting a very basic job done was also becoming challenging, right? So it was important to keep the lights on, keeping the basic IT infrastructure ready for us to do our work. So when we talk about stakeholders also, we talk about either customers, we talk about employees, we talk about partners, or we talk about suppliers, right? So essentially, what we're trying to drive is when we talk about digital transformation, it caters to three of these large areas, right? But what is important for us to acclimatize and accept is to drive this digital transformation initiative, it's very important that you modernize your IT, because modernizing your IT will play a significant role in achieving these organization objectives, right? And one of the stepping stones of IT modernization perhaps begins with cloud, right? I'm not here to disperse information about what is cloud, because I'm fairly confident that most of you use cloud in some form or the other. But what is important for us to understand is, why do we speak about cloud computing while we speak about IT modernization? So let's look at this. Because when we talk about IT modernization, it is a gamut of operations. It's what you're doing on-premise, in your private data centers, as well as what you're doing in a public cloud environment, right? So typically when we look at, why do companies like you prefer cloud? There are no surprises here. And these data points are gathered by talking to people like you, IT decision makers within your organizations, as to what drives their cloud adoption. So if you see here, for instance, strategically aligned to business objectives comes as tops of why enterprises prefer going towards cloud. Minimizing your IT infra complexities. As when one the other way of putting this is, keeping the basic IT infrastructure on. That becomes a challenge at times. But what is important to observe is, I've tracked the cloud market for a very long time. I remember my days when I was a cloud analyst, and cloud was its infancy back in 2007, 2008. And at those days, when we used to talk about cloud, we used to talk about the key tenets of cloud computing. The fact that it's done on a pay-per-use model. Pay-per-use, it was done from, you converge, or you change the way you spend money on IT from a capex-based model to an OpEx-based model. So somewhere, cost optimization was a big driver for cloud. But I think we've come a long way since then. And what we clearly see is while cost optimization remains, as you can see as the third point here, offering OpEx model instead of CapEx still remains to be an important element of why enterprises choose cloud. But I guess more importantly, there are a lot of other benefits, tangible benefits of cloud, which have compelled organizations to embark on the cloud journey, right? So, same question was reflected to our friends at CIO, our CIO friends. So, if you see strong numbers coming here again, like 82% of our friends, feel that having flexible deployment capabilities help them in achieving this right balance as far as their overall IT strategy goes. It helps them doing a lot of testing and development environments. It helps them achieve a modern day business requirement, which is so required in today's tactile and agile world, right? But as we all know, when we talk about a modern IT infrastructure, it is not possible for us to live only in a cloud-enabled world, right? In most scenarios, what we have noticed, and I'm sure I echo the sayings of many experts, people who are today are part of our discussions today, is that a truly modern IT infra setup is actually a hybrid IT setup, where you have in parts a very important role played by a public cloud provider, a very important part played by your on-premise data centers also. Because going forward, we see very strongly hybrid IT being the pivotal force behind all your IT strategy. And to take this hybrid IT, so if you consider hybrid IT as your superset, so a subset of hybrid IT is what we call as embracing the hybrid cloud ecosystem. Look, a hybrid approach gives you the much needed agility and flexibility to your IT infrastructure. So you don't have to take my word for it. We chose to run a quick survey around this to understand, what are some of the reasons why companies go for hybrid cloud adoption. There are questions around, improvement of scalability, lowering the total cost of ownership, like I said, flexibility to maintain your private infrastructure and have a plan for disaster recovery, and also very importantly, I think it's a great point. The fourth point where we talk about moving to the cloud incrementally. This is a journey. I don't know of many organizations who, I know a lot of startups who have been cloud born or cloud natives. But for most of us who are part of today's discussion, we're talking about mid-sized to large-scale organizations who've had a lot of legacy infrastructure to manage. So I guess a more realistic view and vision to cloud is to do it incrementally. And somewhere, hybrid cloud helps you achieve that. But I think a word of caution here, a lot of people tend to get confused between hybrid IT and hybrid cloud. And hybrid IT is essentially a world where you're using public cloud to serve some of your workloads, while some of your mission-critical applications are still residing on your on-premise data center. But in the world of hybrid cloud, you're essentially using a same data set, right? And using the infrastructure that is there on-premise, and for certain requirements, you go to a public cloud environment. So let's understand some of the typical use cases that we've seen as far as hybrid cloud goes. Clearly, one is that of development and testing. So most of us who are in the world of IT, we all know the entire world of technology pivots around applications. So no matter how much we speak about IT infrastructure or cloud computing, all of this is to facilitate those applications that are being used in-house or by external customers, right? So I think in today's world of fail fast and fail safe, it's very important that you have the right DevOps environment. So I guess hybrid cloud actually is a great way of testing and developing your new applications. Second one is data processing. Imagine if I could take an example. For instance, you have IPL around the corner, right? So till now it was hosted by Hotstar. I think going forward it's going to be hosted by Viacom. So in such a scenario, imagine you have the OTT where the typical load on your servers are maybe a couple of thousands or lakhs of people. But on a given day of IPL, say, or the first day of IPL, suddenly there's a burst in terms of the number of people landing onto your page or to your OTT screen, right? Suddenly you have a spike in your requirement, right? You may have almost as close to 1 crore, 2 crore people coming in viewing your content at the same time. For such a scenario, issues around data processing, cloud bursting become very, very effective, right? Then comes a very important element of availability with disaster recovery. We've all come through a very tough phase for all of us, where business continuity became synonymous being alive, because we were at a phase where just keeping the lights on of our IT infra was becoming a challenge. That's where a lot of companies came to realize that what if I have a very strong backup and disaster recovery fail-safe approach, which ensures that I'm never out of business. Somewhere hybrid cloud actually has done a very, very strong role there. And last but not least, we also speak about data center modernization. But I'll speak about data center modernization in my subsequent slides. But so clearly there are a lot of benefits when we speak about hybrid cloud, right? But with every tech deployment, there are bound to be challenges. So let's understand some of the larger issues when we speak about any regular hybrid cloud deployment, right? There are issues around integration, there are issues around legacy data centers, scalability, compliance, over or under provisioning, lacking of data migration capabilities. So let me take them one by one, right? So let's take integration issues. So, imagine a scenario, right, where you have a lot of your legacy applications which reside on your own data centers, right? And for certain scenarios, like I just mentioned, right, you want to scale in and scale out, right? And for that, you need a public cloud environment. But considering that, imagine a lot of your applications are monolithic in nature, whereas typically in a public cloud environment, uh, the architecture is built in such a way that it is more supportive of containers and microservices. So keeping a semblance of both the worlds becomes very important. So imagine if the world of public cloud, the ecosystem is very, very different from what you have in your on-premise, there would always be integration issues. In fact, the legacy data center point is very strongly linked to that, because with legacy data centers comes your legacy infra. And with legacy infra comes challenges of managing and maintaining that data center also. But let's be mindful, there are also many, many application workloads, which are not possible for you to completely, shoot out of your data center and move to cloud. So in such a scenario, I think hybrid cloud becomes very, very effective, right? But like I said, and then there are certain sectors which have issues around compliance. To name a few, I mean, clearly, for instance, the banking sector, very strongly mandated by the governance of what is put down by regulatory authorities like RBI, right? Then you have the healthcare sector, where you have to follow strict guidelines to ensure that data is never outside the jurisdiction of the Indian government, right? Then again, a big challenge of over or under provisioning, because when you talk about cloud being a great leveler of cost optimization is only when you have got it right in terms of how much usage is there. Because there are a lot of scenarios we have come across where people have gone in for a cloud computing portfolio and they end up with huge bills of cloud. And for a reason for which they have had to repatriate their application back to their on-premise. And that's a scenario that you would really want to avoid. So it's very important to make sure that you have the right provisioning, right? So all of this kind of really becomes a challenge in embracing the hybrid cloud, right? So I think one clear standout story that comes out is, how do I ensure that the vision that I have in in a cloud environment, or the architecture that I have in a cloud environment, is kind of mirrored in my data center. And for that to happen, you need to modernize your data center, right? So data center modernization actually is a stepping step, towards hybrid cloud, right? So if you see, and this is where I'm going to introduce you to a technology called as hyper-converged infrastructure. I'm sure many of you are already aware, but it's our take of why we feel, HCI is perhaps the future of data center, right? So let me give you call out first some of the 4 key benefits of hyperconverged, right? A, it provides great flexibility as far as IT infrastructure goes. Right? It helps you optimize the IT resources available to you at your disposal. As a result, it improves your operational efficiency, and because it's so tightly knit, it gives you better control and manageability of data centers. But don't take my word for this. It's very important first. So your first question would be, say, dude, what is hyperconverged infrastructure? Let's take a look at that. So for that, I think it's important that we take a step back and understand how data center fabric has grown. So typically when we speak about data center, right, they're at the end of the day, no matter how much fancy our world becomes of technology, the 3 key elements which constitute a data center, no matter how big or small it is. Essentially, we speak about servers, which provide the compute capacity, the storage, where you store all the data, and the network, which helps you the connected world as we speak about, right? In a conventional data center setup, more often than not, you have 3 different vendors managing 3 different setups. So you'll probably have a server from, say, an X vendor, storage from a Y, and network from a Z. And it is fairly daunting, to manage all these 3 vendors, designing and testing the compatibility and making sure they have the right framework for your business customers. But that was a conventional method which was used forever, and for many organizations still being used. A leap to that was converged infrastructure, wherein you have one single vendor, who validates and designs and pre-tests the infrastructure, for all the 3 components of server, storage, and network. So what it helps eventually is it helps you manage, and smoothen out the operations and automate, faster rollout of applications, right? But having said so, you're still dealing with 3 different sets of server, storage, network. The ultimate in terms of data center convergence is what we are speaking about today, is hyper-converged infrastructure. In a hyper-converged infrastructure, we all have heard of the term virtualization. I'm sure in some capacity or the other, most of you have deployed, say, server virtualization in your own organizations. And you've seen the tangible benefits that you've driven out of it. In very similar manner, hyper-converged infrastructure, what it does is, all your server, storage, and your network, all the devices are converged into one single box. So what you're essentially doing are, all the 3 components are virtualized using a middleware technology, so which are helping you, standardize your requirements in terms of, compute, storage, and the associated network along with that. And because of which, it is much more easy to manage and scale your IT requirement, right? So now if you take back, so like I said, now I said in my previous slide how hyperconverge helps you achieve these 4 key benefits, greater flexibility in IT infrastructure, optimized utilization of resources, improve operational efficiency, and better control of manageability of data centers. Now, if you see on your left, hyperconverged infrastructure, due to the sheer change in how we architect our infrastructure, helps you achieve that. How? For instance, let's take, optimized utilization. Because the entire foundation of this technology is based on virtualization, you are using one box in the most effective manner. So you're actually improving the utilization of your hardware. So effective net, you're actually also reaching a important milestone of reducing your carbon footprint, an area that is being spoken a lot by many community across industries these days, right? So having said so, you may wonder, what does HCI have to do with hybrid cloud? I think and if you see some of the use cases of HCI, I will come to that. HCI complements your hybrid cloud journey very closely. Let's see how. For instance, we know how we spoke about, that we expect a lot of workloads to eventually migrate to a hybrid cloud environment. So we expect around 20 to 25% of workloads to reside both in a public and a private environment. HCI helps you achieve that. Why? Because if you remember what I said in my previous slides, it would help you achieve cloud burst, which was one of the use cases of hybrid cloud. Second, like I said, going forward, every organization is an application-centric organization, because of which managing your IT data centers is going to be very, very tough. So to reduce that burnout, HCI, what it does is it helps you simplify the management of your compute, storage, and networking. So effectively helping you reduce your burnout ratios. And lastly, it will also help you in avoiding, buying additional IT resources. In a way, reducing your carbon footprint as well. But like I said, and like I showed in our hybrid cloud, HCI also has certain challenges. We thought if we speak about challenges, we should also try to share, this is purely based on our understanding at Teal, what are some of the ways to manage them and mitigate them also. First, scaling issues. So one question that might come from some of you is, imagine, and I spoke to a lot of, for instance, media houses, and they say, you know what, most of my requirements are storage heavy, right? So what if I need a lot of storage, but I don't need the necessary amount of compute? So if in a HCI environment, just because I need additional storage, will I be forced to buy compute? Because if you remember, HCI, the entire concept is on all in a box. So if you buy storage, you've got to automatically buy compute, where it comes together. But this is where it's interesting, because a lot of vendors have come with, with the concept having storage dense nodes. Wherein, what we try to say is, in one box, the provision to accommodate more storage is given, because vendors understand with every change, you may not need to have capacity increase in terms of compute, but you will need more storage. So that's an facilitation that vendors have helped you achieve that, right? The second part is, but with more, storage being accommodated in one box, will it impact my network, right? Apparently, if my one network console is in one box, it tends to slow your performance. How do I mitigate that? So what we have given to understand is, really all HCI platforms today, use, network interface cards, which are all virtualized. So also known as, IO virtualization, which essentially virtualizes a network for your virtual machines, right? So what we are essentially trying to drive here is, when you think of deploying HCI, this is not a one size fits all. You've got to understand what your requirements are. You've got to also be clear what are some of the challenges that you face. So for instance, while yes, we do speak of cost optimization, but there is a reduction of cost, but the software comes at a price. So am I making sure that the reduction of cost in hardware is not getting offset by the increase in software cost? I need to do the TCO analysis, right? Also, am I making HCI a silo on its own at times when the application requirements change over time? So these are some of the maybe checks and balances that we need to put in place to make sure our check, our judgment call on HCI is correct, right? But having said so, I think, you want to also understand when we speak about HCI, yes, a very, very important use case of HCI is about data center modernization. And that's what we've been trying to, speak on for the last 50 to 28 minutes. But it's important for you to understand when we speak about HCI, it goes over and beyond data centers modernization, right? So your deployment HCI will help you in your VDI assessment also, because multiple HCI clusters, when put together, can host multiple desktops without the need to buy additional resources, right? You also have, a lot of organizations have, branch offices or remote offices, right? So another use case is, robo, as we call it, right? So it's a critical because you have a couple of HCI servers, which create virtual clusters, which help you facilitate IT infrastructure requirements in remote locations. Then you have, the entire concept of application testing, like I said, fail fast or fail safe. And last but not least, it also helps you achieve a very fructified view of business continuity and disaster recovery. And if you see, one of the silver linings of HCI's use cases, it marries very strongly with the use case of hybrid cloud. If you've kept a note of what I said previously in terms of use cases in hybrid cloud, they somehow map with the use case of HCI. Hence, a marriage of HCI-based infrastructure in your data centers with public cloud is a very effective way to achieve data center modernization. So probably this is what I'd like to conclude today. Before I go, I'll probably give just a handout or some things to consider for you when you think about, should I implement HCI to achieve what I'm trying to achieve. So first, very importantly, is data center modernization a key requirement for my business? And that can be answered partly by knowing how much dependence do you have on, say, a cloud environment. Because going forward, most of our requirements will span across a hybrid world where you have some workloads on a public cloud environment, whereas some workloads on your private cloud or on-prem data centers, right? Then you obviously have questions about hardware cost. There are also issues. Let's be mindful. Previously, about a year back, we had issues about hardware supply chain disruptions. So, do I want to offset that? Also, very importantly, are the applications which we want to put in place, are they ready to be modernized, right? How would it affect the overall end user experience, right? Is my IT team skilled? And very, very importantly, last two, like I said, all said and done in the world of technology, at the end, there are certain human beings which take the decision. Do you have the necessary leadership buy-in? Can you make a compelling story for you to go for data center modernization? And last but not least, do a complete analysis of what are the costs involved. If you're doing this to manage and mitigate cost, see that you do it effectively. So I guess there's a lot to understand. I think 25 minutes does not do justice, but I just thought of doing a primer of how we at Teal look at hybrid cloud and how HCI helps you achieve that. That's it from my end. I'll meet you at the other end to do my moderation. Thank you so much.